Hi, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee. It's a Saturday, 11 o'clock Eastern Time. Hope you are enjoying the warm up that is underway across the Midwest and the Northeast. I just did a live stream for the Patreon members back at about an hour or so ago, and I want to jump on early today. Usually I do the YouTube live streams in the evening, but being it's the weekend and everybody's got things to do, and I got things to do as well. Figured I'd come on in the middle of the day. You can get your fill of what's going on. There's really nothing too pressing with regards to the weather in the eastern part of the United States, because the whole thing, the whole theme around what's going on in the east now is the fact that the cold air has pulled out and warmer air is moving in. And it looks like it's going to take us up into the 50s. As far as the rubber band has been stretched in one direction, it's now snapping back and kind of whiplashing in the other direction. So you folks out in the Midwest, for example, are going to see the most dramatic changes as you run up from double digits below zero to even the fact that you're double digits above zero is a huge deal. So the fact that you're going to be pushing that above the freezing mark in a lot of areas and maybe even into the 40s is a big deal. Okay, that's a huge temperature swing when you think about it in a relatively short period of time. Meanwhile, out in the West, we've got a major storm coming into California. We've been talking about that for the last couple of days, and the entire state is getting either heavy rain or heavy snow. And that storm system is going to be important as it starts to send pieces along next week across the eastern part of the United States. And I think we're going to probably get a pretty good clue as to where the next several weeks and beyond will be going weather-wise in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states in particular, because I think the whole concept of in winter weather patterns may not necessarily repeat exactly, but there's a rhyming that is obvious. And when things start happening the same way, we're into February 1st at this point. It's hard for me to envision how this is going to radically change from what it has been in the winter so far, and just it's just kind of, I guess, for snow lovers, the best thing I can say is that it doesn't look promising for those of you who live in the I-95 corridor from Boston to about Philadelphia. But at least Philadelphia, you folks got an inch of snow out of what happened yesterday. So let's take a look at what's going on. First off, let's look at the snowfall analysis map. By the way, there are a number of weather service tools that are normally available to me that for some reason are either not working at all or they're not working correctly. One of them is the electronic digital data display, where we can just kind of plot whatever we want on the map, and it would have been great last week to show temperatures hour by hour and wind chills and all the rest of it. But that's been down since the middle of January. So with the shutdown, they haven't fixed it yet. And I'm thinking maybe there must be something major that needs to be fixed, because it's been now, the shutdown's over with. Either that or whoever maintains the stuff has had a pre-scheduled vacation, right after the furlough was over. But this was the snowfall from yesterday, and actually some 6-inch amounts fell in western Maryland and parts of northern West Virginia. You had some 1 to 3, 1 to 4-inch amounts throughout much of southern Pennsylvania. A little gap of 2 to 3 inches in coastal southern New Jersey, with Philadelphia getting an inch and Trenton kind of right on the edge there. Right, 195 wound up being the edge here of snow, and there were some 3-inch plus amounts across parts of Delaware. Washington, D.C., about an inch. Looks like Baltimore was on the edge of 1 to 2. And then the amounts kind of went up northwest as you went up and toward Gettysburg and then westward into southern PA. So for what it was, which was a weak area of warm advection, it probably overproduced. And now we can take a look out in the west, because we're starting to see the beginnings of this major storm's impact with respect to snowfall. And there's the some of the snows up the Sierra Nevada so far on the order of 8 to 12 inches, and this only goes back This is 24 hours of snowfall, so let's rub it back to 72 and see if we get anything in addition. And it does. This is all new snow, so we're going to pile on to these amounts during today, especially when you see what's on the radar. And then moving up into Northern California and into Oregon, you see the amounts were sort of scattered, and then throughout parts of up into northern Washington near the Canadian border, and in northern Montana, you're seeing some scattered snows over the last 72 hours. In the last 24 hours, though, it's been concentrated much further to the west. But the surface map shows it pretty well here. You got this wrapped up low that is off the coast there of California, northwest of San Francisco, and moving in an east-southeast direction. Now, that whole low is going to be coming bodily inland. So you've got gales, you got storm warnings up, the heavy rains that are inland, and the heavy snows that are up in the mountains. And meanwhile, in the east, what's left of the Arctic high is not much as it sits over Chesapeake Bay this morning, starting to see temperatures. This was at 7 a.m., so at their lows. I just noticed that my current temperature right now is every bit of 22. So we're making a slow recovery here after a cold morning in the Northeast. But it's in stair steps. We're just kind of taking these 10-degree jumps every day. And the southwest flow is pretty well established now from the Midwest, except the upper Midwest, but the Midwest on south and west of there. So the warmer air, we're looking at temperatures at 7 a.m. that were in the mid-20s, positive mid-20s, okay, in and around the Chicago area, for example. So that's a huge change. Again, showing the dramatic nature of what happens. So to get these cold air masses like this, when the whole vortex or a strong vortex drops down and it hangs around, it's one thing. But this one came down, did what it did for its 2-day stint, and then pulled out to the northeast, off the California coast. And this is the satellite loop this morning of this storm off the California coast. It really is very well defined. It's got that classic, signature there, that comma or quotation mark look as it heads towards the coast. And that low looks like it's dropping east-southeastward, so probably come inland somewhere near San Francisco. The low center will. And all that moisture just sweeping up into the west and then northward up into Idaho and Montana. You can see how the clouds are all going there. And there's another system here that's dropping down southeastward. It's amazing how you watch these parade of storms sometimes in the west and how they show up on the satellite. They're very, very impressive at times. And I think this is one of those moments where you're seeing the impressive nature of what's happening. Take a look at the radar. I'm going to bring up, let me refresh this and get the latest radar out in the west with this storm. I mean, you're seeing a ton of rain here. That's the whole occlusion, that occluded front that you saw on the surface map. I'm going to bring it back up again. There we go. I don't think the 15Z map is up yet, so this should be the latest one. And it is. Okay, so you can see that long front there, the occluded front, the point of occlusion that is where the warm front, stationary front that extends eastward into into Northern California. And then you got the cold front that runs down right along the immediate coast, that very, very long, almost like a gigantic arm that is rotating around and inland, and ahead of it, all that heavy rain that has now moved inland of the coast. There's still some showery rains going on along coastal areas and heavy rains as you head down toward LA. But much of that arm now is inland. So in the colder air, in the mountains, in the Sierra Nevadas, on up northward into eastern California and northward, you're getting some big snows at the moment. And there's going to be spots up there that are going to wind up with the snow measured in feet. A little bit of action, by the way, in parts of southeast Georgia and off the Florida coast. There's a weak low that's developing there. Got a tiny bit of snow now in upstate New York, but away from the lake effect zone, which was the eastern shores of Lake Erie into areas up I-81 north of Route 13 toward Watertown. Those areas got hit very, very hard with several feet of snow, thanks to lake effect. And we also have a few showers scattered in Texas, and some snows up in the northern Rockies. So we're gonna. I want to just switch over now. I'm gonna bring up the teleconnections, which are back. Thanks to the shutdown being over, we've got them back, and we've got. Um, I guess this is a pretty good example of just how crazy the Pacific is in terms of the fact that the Pacific North America Index, which is going to reflect the existence of a ridge in the east, trough in the west, or trough in the west, ridge in the east. When it is strongly negative like this, we're talking deep trough in the west. And it's off the wall, okay? Normally, it's between readings. You see the readings on this between minus 200 and plus 200. We're talking here well over minus 400. So this is the PNA is stretched out to an extreme here as we move into, this is by the time we get to the 9th or 10th of February is when it's at its most extreme before it starts climbing up toward the neutral line. The other thing, though, that kind of puts a bit of a twist to this is that the Eastern Pacific Oscillation, or the EPO, is also strongly negative, more than minus 200 going into February 10th. So, normally you wind up seeing those two indices kind of in line. So if the PNA is negative, the EPO oftentimes winds up being positive. Doesn't always work out that way, but a lot of times it does. So we're seeing a bit of an interesting twist here. And the reason why it's important is with that East Pacific Oscillation is negative, it does suggest that the temperatures in the eastern part of the United States, or particularly the Northeast, tend to be colder. However, because of the fact that you've got this PNA index, or Pacific North America Index, signaling the fact there's going to be a ridge in the east, it would suggest that that cold air, if that cold air is going to be a factor and more important, may wind up only showing up at the bottom part of the atmosphere, making it rather shallow and not extending very far up. So you could have, it might be pointing to perhaps for some areas down the road later next week with whatever weather systems are having impact, that ice might be the bigger deal more than anything else. I don't know. And in terms of the specifics, I don't know either. The NAO is just kind of on a hammock right now, taking a very long snooze. It's sitting in the neutral zone, maybe ever bit slightly positive, and that's it. And it just kind of holds there, maybe treads back toward the neutral zone later in the period. So I don't really think the NAO is having any serious impact on the weather pattern going forward, other than to say that there's no real blocking. Weather systems are going to be, are going to be pretty much trying to move along, but it's not exerting a huge influence here in terms of the overall pattern. It's not as if we have a strong negative signal or a strong positive signal where it's going to be materially part of the equation. I think right now it's really about that off-the-wall Pacific North America Index and the strongly negative Eastern Pacific Oscillation Index that are going to be front and center. So let's take a look at the new GFS, which is coming out now. My Patreon members got a pretty good briefing as to where the what to look for, and what we're going to be looking for going into next week is how that energy that comes into the west behaves as it moves eastward. Is it going to come out in pieces and just kind of one going after the other, or is it going to come out as one solid piece? Because if it comes out in pieces, I think that makes for a stronger possibility where you're going to be dealing with some ice and maybe in some areas even some snow. Whereas if it comes out only in one piece, I think then it's going to be mostly a rain event in the east and a stronger storm that tracks up toward the eastern Great Lakes that probably brings some bigger snows to the to parts of the Great Lakes and the upper Midwest. I think that's where we are in looking at this. So what you're seeing right now is back a couple of days ago when we had the upper vortex, drop down into the Great Lakes. And again, with nothing to hold it there, it lifts up and out, and then the model drops this deep trough. There's your California storm coming inland today, and we did point out on the satellite. Just watch that little disturbance coming off the Aleutians. Uh, Wraps up a bit more, and you've got a kind of a second wave of energy that goes into the west early next week. So it's going to be pretty busy weather-wise in the west, at least into Monday or Tuesday. And then as we move ahead, in the east, the ridge in the east kind of flattens out a bit. Now, of course, the vortex is long gone here in the east. You see that just pulls out, and you get this sort of flat ridge. You warm it up. There's a little disturbance off the southeast coast. That's evident by the rains that we saw on the radar off of Florida. So that gets kicked away to the northeast. And then you start to see a trough dig down in the southwest, and then some energy that comes down into near Lake Winnipeg. The flow in the east at this point is kind of on the flat side. So we are into Thursday. So let's see how the GFS plays this out. We're not going to have the whole run here in time. So we're going to take a look at what the GFS had, the operational GFS, by the way, as opposed to the parallel. But here's the surface map. So there's your West Coast storm. Big rain, big snows, pretty large coverage in terms of impact. And then that snow drives up through the northern Rockies in a big way. So we've got some heavy snows being indicated there for Montana and into the Dakotas where cold air exists. Low pressure moving across. The warm-up in the east continues, again, in stair-step fashion. That low in southern Nebraska turns northeast. This all makes sense. You got a low that moves into southeastern Canada. Cold front follows. And meanwhile, still more action going on into the west into California. Now, there's your high. It's just kind of spreading out here. We're at Tuesday afternoon. The cold front in the east with the low that's running up in southeastern Canada is moving right along, and you've got this cold front that extends from that low down to about New York City. So in terms of the warm-up, I think we're going to have, Monday's going to be a fairly warm day. Actually, also mentioning for my neck of the woods, eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, that there might be local sea breezes if you're along the coast. So you might not get see that warm-up like everybody else. And also it depends on whether your local bays are frozen or not, because that also will have impact on how far inland any kind of ocean breeze gets. That front goes by, and you're starting to see this high kind of spreading out. Part of it hangs back over northern Montana. You've got another high center up near northeast of Lake Superior, between Superior and James Bay. Northerly flow in the east, but it's not really all that cold aloft. So you've got the 540, that magic 540 rain snow line is pretty far inland of the coast. It's not near New York City. It's actually up halfway between New York City and Albany. So again, this is reflecting the fact that you're going to be in that ridge position in the eastern part of the United States, that strongly negative Pacific North America index having an impact, somewhat getting offset at the low levels. The East Pacific oscillation is what's playing out here with these big highs. And you've got low pressure there that the model snapshots in eastern Colorado, but there's lower pressures, a bit of an inverted trough here in extending from Oklahoma up into Iowa, and that's producing that area of snow and freezing rain and rain. Now, going forward, again, the question is going to be pieces or one big piece. So we actually have the first piece. The operational GFS is arguing here with the parallel GFS from last night that maybe pieces will be the bigger solution. It also seems to have more of this high coming down on this run and then prior runs into the Dakotas. Now there's your impact of the colder air at low levels, because the model is actually predicting some freezing rain in northern Pennsylvania, southeastern New York, and western Connecticut. You have to go up the Hudson Valley to find any kind of light snow. Then that moves out. And here comes your second piece, this sort of flattish looking wave that runs northeastward. Now, here's where you got to be careful, because if you do wind up with a flat piece that comes out, you could find yourself in a situation where the colder air gets to be more important and forces itself further south. You kind of have hints of that there. You see where the freezing rain and the snow still is pretty far up to the north. It looks like it wants to keep that frontal boundary close to or just south of New York City, which is going to be dependent on how strong the ridge is in the eastern part of the United States. But it definitely at least shows that you've got one piece that comes out and runs away to the northeast. And then there's yet a third piece here toward the end of next week. Now, who knows at this point, as each piece goes by, there's a little more cold air behind it, particularly after the second piece. And then you've got this third piece that starts to get suppressed because the model wants to bring all that cold air. You got a 1057 high in parts of that's sitting up in northwestern Minnesota that's coming down, and we'll see if that is the case or not. But and how much of that cold air is actually going to spread out, or is the model overdoing it? But if you wind up with what the European did last night, it kind of leads to a different scenario in the long term, and this is what I was kind of focusing my attention on here, because the European, if you watch the upper air on the European with what comes into the west, it really just kind of takes this an entire piece and lifts it up and intensifies it as it moves it into southeastern Canada. So it would just basically have, maybe a weak piece comes out ahead of it, but that second piece on the European winds up being one big low that it decides to make. And I'll show it to you here on its surface map. And there you have it. I mean, it basically just takes one big low up near Chicago. This, of course, juxtaposed against the GFS's much flatter looking idea, because the GFS is kind of looking at that whole EPO setup and just saying, you know what, cold air is going to be able to spread out more and be more important. How important, we don't know. But there's your GFS with that low sitting near Louisville, Kentucky for the same time frame. You've got the old European from last night with the one deep low. And it's funny because the European and the Canadian are just kind of lockstep in this. And also the icon model, the GFS has been sort of standing alone with its look. But there's your low in Lake Michigan, a 995, much more wrapped up low, one definable deepening wave that runs up to the northeast. And of course, this is going to be a totally different scenario with regards to the outcome of the weather here in the east, because you bring a warm front up the east coast, and the low winds up going up into southern Canada. I mean, we're talking really wrapped up here in southern Canada, whereas the GFS has got these waves that are going out to the east northeast. So that, I think, is really the big issue going forward with regards to where the weather is going to take us over the coming days. And if we see, I think if we see the Europeans' view come to pass, I believe that is just going to cement the idea that the trough is going to want to be in the west for the coming weeks ahead, rather than maybe the GFS's view is that things would be more transient in nature, that you might be in a situation where you start going back and forth. But if you look at the European through at least the next 10 days, after this first system, whatever happens this coming week, the trough goes right back into the western part of the United States. The GFS on the old run seems to have a bit more of a transient nature to things, with some sort of northern jet getting involved. But that's why I think it's pretty important to see what happens this week going forward, because it might really determine how much real winter we have left here in the eastern part of the United States, with in terms of opportunities for snowfall. Okay, because for the snow lovers, that really is what it boils down to. And I'm just not, I don't know. I guess now that we're at almost to February 2nd, considering where we are and what's going on, it's hard to be overly bullish. Let's put it that way. So here's the how the Model C, at least for the I-95 corridor, anyhow. Let's be clear on that, because for other areas in the Northeast, has the snow has been ample, and even in through the Mid-Atlantic states, that has been the case. So you can see the outcome of the new GFS with the snow hole continuing sort of in the middle. Some snows up well to the north, and actually even some snows well up to the south, if its idea of the waves coming out in pieces is correct. And then you get your other snow hole here in central Illinois, southern Indiana, and you get some snows up into the Chicago area. Again, how much of this is going to be snow and how much of this is ice remains to be seen. And we'll look at the West, because the West is getting its fair share with that trough in the West. The snowfalls should be pretty ample up and down the West Coast, including maybe even some of the coastal big cities, well, quote unquote coastal big cities like Seattle, for example, might get into some snow here. Tacoma, Seattle, etc. Even down into Oregon, Portland, those cities like Portland and so on could see some snow out of this. And of course, in the mountains of California and the Sierra Nevadas, that whole strip that kind of looks like the blank white, but it really isn't. This whole strip is on the order of 48 inches or 48 inches or more. So we're talking about a ton of snow. And solid snows up and down the Rockies with the trough in the west. You would kind of expect that to be the case. Meanwhile, there has been some snow going on in England, as I have been reading. The royal couple has been kind of dealing with this. And we are looking at the next 7 days in terms of snowfall, kind of backs off a bit now in England and Ireland, a little bit more as you head into Western Europe away from the coast. And we'll take a look at what the surface maps are telling us here. There is a bit of a warm-up going on in eastern areas, and we'll take a look at that in a second on the upper air. But going into tomorrow and Monday, so you're still getting waves of systems coming in off the Atlantic with rain for the most part. And it looks like for this week coming up, most of what's coming in is going to be in the form of rain. So let's look at the upper air and see what's happening. You're starting to lose, you've got this deep trough right now, but you notice on the far right is a ridge that's building up over Turkey and into Russia. And that ridge is actually going to kind of reposition itself and strengthen in the eastern part of the Mediterranean. So that actually suggests a pretty sizable warm-up going up northward into Siberia. You get another deep trough that runs into the western Mediterranean here that cuts off. But the upper air pattern doesn't look especially cold after what's been a very cold and snowy stretch for much of Central and Eastern Europe, and occasionally has kind of pushed its way toward the west. Might be in the process of taking a break and evolving into a new pattern, much like what we see happening in North America. Although I would caution, we only we don't have all the maps out. They're kind of coming out in pieces today. And a check on conditions in Eastern Canada with respect to the overall weather pattern. None of this, by the way, favors systems out in the Atlantic at all. And that means that as far as the precip producers in southeastern Canada, they're going to be relatively weak systems that come in and out and go by. And some of them may actually bring more rain than anything else in the absence of cold air until we get to later next week. If we got this idea of the waves coming out in pieces like the GFS has, it might make it a bit more bullish down the road later next week with regards to any kind of snow. One thing that I do want to bring up here, which is something that we haven't really talked about too much, and I think it's really important in terms of the scheme of the overall pattern and with regards to the winter, and that's this. There's always a lot of focus on the Atlantic Ridge. I'm sorry, on the Pacific, on the jet stream out in the Pacific, and understandably so. There should be. The Pacific is hugely important, and it is a huge driver in the weather going forward. But we don't often pay attention to what's going on in the Atlantic, and what is going on in the Atlantic remains really problematic for snow lovers in coastal areas of the Northeast and places further south, and that's because you've got this. You know, if you look at the jet stream across the Atlantic, it's kind of like an upside down V, with with the exception of the upper low that splits the ridge in two out in the Atlantic. But you've got this screaming jet that runs from Florida to off the coast of Newfoundland. You've got the apex of here in the middle, and then it goes northwesterly on the other side. There's very little out there to kind of slow things down or to perhaps move weather systems around. And when you look at this going forward, there's not much hope for this. If you look at the Atlantic grid, the Atlantic jet stream going forward, it's like a ruler just going straight off the mid-Atlantic coast straight across, and you get the occasional weather system that kind of moves along there, but on the whole, it's not. If you had the Atlantic filled with storms and basically jamming up traffic to the south and west, then you're going to have some opportunities. But as long as you've got this almost screaming looking jet in the Atlantic, it's hard to envision how you're going to have outcomes with respect to snow. And in fact, the longer we go with this kind of setup in the Atlantic, the stronger the argument that winter may start to wind down in a big way, and that we may actually wind up with an earlier spring, or perhaps this may wind up being a year where these late season, we've been having these winters where they've been kind of extended, late into March and April, and maybe this might be one of those years where it doesn't quite happen that way. And look, understand, and I want to make this clear. We're at February 2nd, and I get the fact that we're at February 2nd. It's quite a thing. I'm not coming out officially and predicting this, but I'm just observing that as long as you have these conditions out here, it's hard to make the case that you're going to see some kind of big flip. We did see one last year, and who knows? Maybe something down the road might cause that to happen again. I don't know. But it's kind of hard to look at what you've got in front of you, which is where I always try to focus on what's in front of me and not what might be. But in terms of what we've got in front of us, it's hard for me to envision at this point that we're going to suddenly go into a very bullish pattern for the areas that have been lacking in snow cover. That's kind of how I see it, really. Okay, so I'm coming down to the chat board. Reaver 501, please make the instructional videos of the 500 millibar so we can learn what the numbers mean on the lines. I appreciate what you say. And you know what? I did mention a couple of weeks ago that I was going to try and do it once I didn't have my hands full. And the problem, with my neck the way it's been, it's kind of taking, it's taken its toll on me in getting enough time to do it. But I promise I will get it done. There will be a point where I will be able to sit down and cut and cut some instructional videos on reading these maps. Peter, so do I think the European model is going to go down in flames again with over-amped storm? I mean, look at those 5 to 6 fake Northeast blizzards. Well, look, I think, Peter, the European, has been going down in flames in a big way this winter. It has been awful in its views. When it certainly has come to dealing with the idea of a trough in the east and some of these big storms that it has produced in the eastern part of the United States. So, I think I think the fact that it just has not performed well would lend to the idea that maybe it will go down in flames. But On the other hand, it is dealing with more of a trough in the west, and the European, a lot of times when it has that trough in the west, does wind up being a much better performer. So that's I think I think that the it really does boil down to, as I said, the fact that whether it becomes a matter of watching the flatter looking GFS with the idea of the system coming out in pieces, or you're going to have one big piece. It really does boil down to it. And I think that also that if it does wind up being the one big piece, that suggests to me that the trough in the West is going to be a really dominating feature going forward. So we'll let's look at what happens over the next couple of days. I think the table is set, and we're gonna have a pretty good idea of how the weather is going to be playing out over the next several weeks on the basis of what happens this coming week and how models handle it. Ethan Kerr got his 1 inch in Toms River, the biggest storm of the year, and it puts your snowfall total at 2.5 inches. Insane, isn't it? 2.5 inches of snow for the entire winter, and you didn't even get much from that November system. At least the areas just inland of you and to the north have that November system to hang their hats on. And I had made a point to say back to a few people that if it winds up being the biggest snows of the year, biggest snow of the year, don't be shocked. One of the things that has really stood out to me is the fact that it really feels this. Those of you who are not my age, okay, which is I'm 60. I just turned 60 last week. So those of you who are not my age, will and if you've been a weather you have no idea. You may not go back far enough to understand what the winters were like in the 70s and 80s. Maybe you got a glimpse of the 90s, but as far as the 70s and 80s is concerned, you might not have been there for that. Those of you who have been there with that can remember how, at least for the coastal cities, from Boston to Washington, there were very, very few winters in there that produced big snows for the I-95 corridor. And this winter, the way it has played, the feel of this winter to me feels like those winters were back when I was a teenager and when I was, in my early adulthood and in the early part of my career, when I came to Long Island and then worked my way into New York City. So it does feel like that. It feels like those winters back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So you wonder at some point this kind of this pattern that we've been in, this cyclical pattern or this decadal pattern that we've been in since the year 2000, at some point it's going to run its course. Now, whether it's now run its course or this is a hiccup year and what is a pattern that may continue for the coming years ahead and has a ways to go yet, I don't know. If you want to look at decadal cycles, you could make an argument that the last one went from lasted about 30 years. So you could argue that maybe the decadal cycle could certainly run another 10 or 12 years before it comes to an end, or maybe this is going to be a shortened version of it. Again, I don't know. Was I ever nervous being on TV when I first started? Yeah, the first time, the very first time, yeah, and then it got better. Now it's just, once you get over here's the thing about doing television or doing any kind of videos, get over the fact that millions of people are going to see it, because the odds of millions of people seeing it are astronomically low, especially when we're talking about doing a weather cast. So once you realize that even back then when there was no internet to speak of at all, and it was just basically you had free TV and you had air TV and you had cable. So I think when you're young, you have this sort of overblown idea that everybody watches and everybody's watching television news and everybody's watching you, and you quickly realize, I learned that right away. You quickly realize how few people watch, okay, over in a population. When I worked at Channel 11 on a Sunday night, So in a market where the reach is about 15 million, okay, on a good Sunday night, we would have maybe 250, 300,000 people watching out of 15 million. So that's a really small percentage. So once you realize the fact that there aren't, um, you know, millions of people watching you, it becomes a lot easier to handle being behind the camera. And also, now, and also the fact that the people you work with are the people you work with. So they're doing their job, which is, whatever that happens to be. So you're, they most of the time, like when the technical people that I work with, for example, when I'm taping something or if I'm doing something live, they are not necessarily paying attention to anything I'm doing because they're busy doing all sorts of other things. They're setting up the next shot. They're doing, they're getting ready for something that's coming on down later on in the show that they have to be technically ready for. So they're not paying attention either. So you're basically talking to a camera, which is an inanimate object, and that makes it a lot easier once you get, and then there's nothing really to be nervous about. To tell you the truth, I get more, I get a little nervous when I go on my library talks because then I'm actually talking to real people, but only a little bit. Thank you, Jason Schaefer. You miss me. No offense to your colleagues. I'm sure they appreciate it, but maybe offense to one or two of those colleagues. Oh God, we'll talk later. Jason produced for used to when I filled in on WPIX, which I'm no longer doing. They Jason produced with me and worked with me from time to time, and we always had fun. Any updates in tech coming to help with forecasts? Asked Paul Roman. You know what, Paul? They're supposed to make that parallel GFS is supposed to become operational, and it hasn't yet. And I think the shutdown has created a bit of a delay as far as that becoming the operational run. So let's look for that to happen first. I don't think there are any other upgrades in any of the models that I know of that are scheduled. Uh, See, Linda Hernandez, you've had 13 inches of snow in southeastern Virginia so far this winter. And so for you, this was an exceptionally snowy winter. You know as well as I do that you can go a long time without seeing a significant snowfall in southeastern Virginia. Reaver, no, I am not referring to Kaiti Tong. She is just, of all the people I've worked with over the years, she's on a very short list of my own personally, who I adore working with her. She's a wonderful person and just an absolute professional. Just knows how to do stuff when it comes to being on air. She's absolutely terrific. It's been an honor for me to be able to just kind of be on the same set with her. It was one of the biggest thrills of my career when I first started working at 11, to be on the set with her and working with her side by side. And we've had a number of good laughs. If you ever want to see, she's on a couple of my videos in there where I'm sneezing. I actually sneeze on the air, which is not something, I think I've done it twice in 40 years. But take a look at that. I mean, she's just a joy to work with, and I'm not just saying it. Okay, it's absolute true. Mary Murphy was another anchor who I had an absolutely terrific time with her on air. We had tons of fun working together on the weekends, and uh, she I always said that and I still say it. She's the best reporter in New York television that I've worked with, and that I'm in my opinion, she is front and center and terrific. Okay, so enough of that. Let's see. Uh, just running through the last of your. Are you shocked at how much snow Long Island has gotten this winter, and you think it will turn around? Ask at Matt M. I got to tell you, Matt. The fact that Long Island has been the new Buffalo for the last 17 or 18 years. It was bound to happen. If it winds up that we get very little, if any, snow this winter, it was bound to happen at some point. I'm actually not kind of that surprised. The idea of a subpar winter has been in my mind for a couple of years now. If anything has surprised me, is the fact that it's taken, after the winter of 14-15 and going into the winter of 15-16 with the big El Nino, I figured that was going to be the one that was going to be subpar, and it turned out not to be. And then, well, the next one with the 16-17, I think, which was La Nina, I thought, well, maybe there's a chance for something to be subpar. And that turned out to be downright bizarre because it was such a warm winter, but it snowed every single time it got cold, particularly on the coast. So go figure that out. And then there was 17-18, which, of course, was, the winter where everything was kind of stretched to an extreme. You went from very, very cold for 6 weeks to very, very warm for 6 weeks, for very stormy for 4 weeks. We had the storms in the month of March. So, it was bound to happen along the way that you're going to have a subpar year, and maybe this one for Long Island was it. All right, folks, going to call it a day at this point. So let's get outside and enjoy the warm-up, okay? Because that's important. After this bitter blast, it's time to enjoy the warm-up. You can find additional weather information and weather posts, by the way, on my Patreon page. You can see right up there where it says Patreon. That is a platform that I have built that is a subscription platform. And on there, you get live streams, you get weather stuff just for Patreon members. You can message me at any time, and it's just $2 a month. Okay, that's it, $2, and it goes a long way in supporting all the stuff that I'm doing. And here is the link to that. If you're interested, please, by all means, give it a go. It's just $2 a month, and you get all this extra stuff. And when we've had storms, you get even more extra stuff. So that is a big plus. Also, if you are on Google Play, I'm sorry, if you're got an Android device, you can download my free weather app if you haven't already. Which, by the way, has gotten, and I'm thrilled with this, gotten a lot of good reviews, and I'm really happy about that. So here's the Google Play version. On now, I am going to see if I can quickly, if you go to the App Store, because we're now there, on for iPhones. Okay, so I just gotta give me 1 second, folks. I just have to pull up the link, and I have to pull it up. I got it bookmarked, and I've got 1,000 bookmarks to shuffle through. But otherwise, you can go to the App Store and just search Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. This is an absolutely free app, and I think you'll like it. Please, by the way, take advantage of the local and the map section on here, because you can pull up your own local forecast for your own local forecast and for your location. So you really can use this just about anywhere. The other thing is check the map feature, because you not only have Zoom radar on there, but you can add temperatures and wind, and you can move it around all over the place. It's a good, easy tool to figure out what's going on weather-wise in your local area, and even in a bigger time frame. Plus, you get the live streams on the app itself. You get notifications when new stuff comes on, and there's also, if we ever get to use them in a widespread way, I have every map of the East Coast, up and down the East Coast, of the National Weather Service snow forecast maps. You have them all on one page, so you won't even have to go to every individual website if you want to take a look, or if you're traveling. It's all there. So you just scroll down on the home page, past the daily update, and then just go a little lower, and you'll find every map on there, from Georgia all the way up to Maine, and all the way back to the east side of the Appalachians. So I think that's a big plus. So those are the links for that. You've got the Patreon link. Thanks very much for being here today. Enjoy your Saturday. We'll probably catch you at some point on Super Bowl Sunday before the game. All right. Goodbye, everybody.